Shua Tov, everybody. This week we read Parshat VaYeishev. It's Parshat VaYeishev. It's also Parshat Chanukah. And in Parshat VaYeishev, there's probably my favorite story in Chamisha Chumshei Torah. That's the story of Yehuda and Tamar. I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background to the story. We're not going to start from the beginning of the parak. The story occurs simply as it's told, at least within the Chumash. It appears that the story occurs immediately after the sale of Yosef. Yehuda is blamed by his brothers for not clearly stating his opinion at the sale of Yosef, whether Yosef should be sold or be brought back to Yaakov Avinu. The brothers blame him. He's not willing to take the heat. He leaves the family. He gets involved in business deals with a non-Jewish person. He marries a daughter of a Kanaani, a simple Pshat Kanaani, a woman perhaps that he should not have married. He has 3 children with this woman, 2 in which we see are certainly not Tzaddik and Gemurim. 2 of them have died. The first son, who marries this woman by the name of Tamar, dies shortly after the marriage. The second son, also, who does a yibum with this, a sort of yibum with this girl, he too dies under dubious circumstances shortly after the marriage. And we were going to pick up the story now with what's going to happen with this woman. There was one brother left, Shelah, the youngest brother, and will Yehuda have this girl Tamar marry him in yibum marriage, or will he send her home and tell her have a happy life? So that's where we pick up the story. It's in Perek Lamed Ches, starting with Pasuk Yud Aleph. And first, let me read the story. I'll try to read it quickly. And as I'm reading it, I want you in your own minds to think of all the difficulties and problems that you might have with the story. And hopefully we will raise most of them as we go along. So starting with Pasuk Yud Aleph. V'yomer Yehuda l'Tamar kalaso. Yehuda said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Shvi almana beis avich. Go back and remain a widow in your father's house. Go back home to your father. Ad yigdal Shelah bani, until my surviving son Shelah grows up. Ki amar, because Yaakov said, Pen yamut gam hu kechav, lest he die like his brothers. Vatelach Tamar, so Tamar went. Vateshev beit avia, she went back to live in her father's home. Vayirbu hayamim, time passed. V'tamat bat Shua eshet Yehuda, and bat Shua, the wife of Yehuda, died. Vayinochem Yehuda was comforted, sat shiva. V'ala goes sono, and he went up to shear his sheep. Hu v'chira re'ehu hadulamit himnasa. He and his friend Chira, the Adulamite, to the city of Timnah. Vayugad l'Tamar lemor, and it was told to Tamar, saying, Hinei chamich oleh Timnasa lagos sono. Behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. Vatasar bigdei amanusa me'aleha. She took off the clothes of widowhood from upon herself. Vatachas baseif vatisalav, and she wrapped herself up in a scarf. Vatesha bepesach einayim, and she sat at the crossroads, asher al derech Timnasa, which was on the way to Timnah. Ki rasa, ki gadal Shelah, because she saw that Shelah had grown up. V'hi lo nitna lo liisha, and she had not been given to him as a wife. Vayireha Yehuda, and Yehuda saw her. V'yachshevel l'zona, and he thought that she was a prostitute. Ki kisasa paneha, because her face was covered. Vayet eleha el haderech, he turned to her to the road. V'yomer, and he said, Hava no avo alayich, let me please come and have relations with you. Ki lo yada, because he did not know, ki kalasohi, that she was his daughter-in-law. Vatomer, and she said, Mati tenli, what will you give me? Ki tavo elai, if I allow you to come into me. Vayomer, and he said, Anochi ashalach gedi izim min atzon, I will send a goat from my flock of sheep. Vatomer, and she said, Im titein eravon al chochecha. The price is right. I'm willing, but I want a security. I want you to leave a security. How do I know that after we have this relationship, you'll actually pay me? VaYomer, and he said, Maha revona asher atein. So what type of security would be sufficient for me to give you? Vatomer, and she said, Chasomcha upsilecha umatcha asher biyadecha. Your signet ring, your cloak, and the staff which is in your hand. Vayitein la, he gave these things to her. V'yavo elaha, he came into her. Vatar lo, and she became pregnant from him. Vatakam batelech, she got up and she went. Vatasar tzeifa me'aleha, and she removed her scarf from upon her. Vatubash b'dei amanuta, and she redonned the clothes of her widowhood. Vayishlach Yehuda skadi ha'izim, Yehuda sent the kid goat, biyad reyehu ha'adulami, through the hands of his friend the Adulamite. Lakachat harevon miyad ha'isha, to take back the security from the hand of the Isha, from the woman, below mitzvah. And Chira couldn't find her where Yehuda said she would be. Vayishal and Anshe Mekom more, and he asked the men of the place, saying, Ayeh hakdesha hi beinayim al hadarach. Where is this kadesha? Where is this prostitute that normally stays by the crossroads? He doesn't use the word zonah here, he uses the word kadesha. But Yomru, they said, Lo haisa b'zeh kadesha, we don't know what you're talking about. There's never been a woman like that in that area. We don't know what you're referring to. VaYeishev el Yehuda. So he returned to Yehuda. VaYomer lo mitzati, and he said, I couldn't find her. And also the men of the place said, Lo haita b'zeh kadesha, there's never been this kadesha. We don't know what you're talking about. VaYomer Yehuda tikach la, let her take what she's got. Peniyeh lavuz, lest we be shamed. More people that know about it, the worse it'll be. I did my part. I sent this kid goat, and you weren't able to find her. And it was in approximately 3 months later. And it was told to Yehuda, saying, Zansa Tamar kalasecha, your daughter-in-law Tamar has committed an immoral act. She's also pregnant from this immoral act. Vayomer Yehuda, and Yehuda said, Hotzi uha v'tisarev, take her out and burn her. He mutzeit, she was being let out. V'hishalcha el chamia lemor, and she sent to her father-in-law the following message: Leish asher ela lo anochi hara, the man to whom these things belong, I have become pregnant. Vatomer, and she said, Haker na, please recognize. Lemi hachotemet v'apsilim v'hamata ha'ela, to whom belong this signet ring, this cloak, and this staff. Vayaka Yehuda, Yehuda recognized. Yomer tzadka mimeni, and he said, she is more righteous from me. Kalkein lo netatia l'sheila b'ni, because I did not give her to my son Shela. B'lo yosaf od l'data, and he didn't continue to know her any longer. Vahi be'es l'data, and it was when she gave birth. V'hinei tu'umim b'vitna, and behold, there were twins in her womb. Vahi b'l'data, vayitein yad, and it was when she was giving birth, the first child stretched out his hand, breech birth, the hand came out first. Vatika chamialedet, the midwife took the hand. Vatikshar ayado shani lemor. Right? She put on his hand a ribbon saying, Ze yatsa rishona. This one went out first, just like they do in hospitals. You put on a plastic thing telling you this child was the first child. Vahi kameshivya though, and it was when his hand was brought back. V'nei yatsa achiv, and behold, his brother came out. Strange birth. The one who was supposed to come out first went back in, and the other brother came out first. Vatomer, and she said, Ma paratz alacha paretz. I mean, what breach have you made here? What's going on here? Vayikra Shmo Peretz. So she called the name of the second son, who basically pulled back the first son and came out first instead, Peretz. V'achar yatsa achiv, and afterwards his brother, the second brother, came out. Asher al yado hashani, that had on his hand the crimson ribbon. Vayikra Shemo Zorach, and she called his name Zorach. End the story. Right? Interesting story, strange story. What are the problems on the story? I would assume we all can be in agreement that perhaps the most difficult problem in the story, the most troubling problem, is how in the world do we explain the actions of Yehuda? Okay, if you want to play psychologist, his wife just died. He was a little bit depressed. He probably was depressed even before his wife died, given all the events that happened previously, having to leave home and being held responsible for the sale of Yosef and his father not getting over it. He's depressed. He sees a prostitute. He wants to be able to relieve some of his tensions. Okay, it's possible, but certainly not from somebody on the level of Yehuda. That would we expect such behavior? Question number one: how do you explain the actions of Yehuda? And what's even more troubling is that if you look within Chazal, there doesn't seem to be any major critique regarding the behavior of Yehuda. And you'll say, well, that's what the Chumash does. It tries to whitewash and tries to raise up the status of these people, and it downplays their questionable behavior. But that's really not true. Starting from all the way back to Adam HaRishon, throughout the stories, we have critiques of Avram, we have critiques of Noah, we have critique of Yitzchak, we have critiques of just about everybody. And this is such an obvious problem. Why in the world is the Medrash void of any serious critique of what Yehuda did? Question number one. Question number two is also, you can also question the behavior of Tamar, right? What was her plan when she was planning to meet Yehuda on the road? Did she really get dressed up as a prostitute and think that her holy father-in-law was going to go over to her and proposition her? What type of planning was that? And if that was not her plan, when she hears him coming over and propositioning her, why doesn't she respond? Well, she said, what's going on? Do you know who I am? Why does she go along with everything that he proposes? So how do you explain her response to his proposition? Also, why doesn't he recognize her? I mean, he's had two of his sons have married this girl. You'll tell me, well, she was covered up, which is again a different problem. Why cover up this? Was she really covered up or not? Why would she cover herself up? She wants to be a prostitute. Would she want to publicize what the client is buying? Okay, there are answers to this question, but why doesn't he doesn't, at least even the voice? Why doesn't he recognize her voice patterns? Also, when she asks for a security, when I was in high school, so I was dorming in the MTA dorms, and when we wanted to borrow a football or basketball from the house mother, we would always have to give a security. For a $10 football, I wasn't going to give $100 bill security. That's kind of ridiculous. So here too, Yehuda promises a kid goat. She asks for very expensive and personal items, which could be used subsequently to blackmail Yehuda if she so wanted to do so. His signet ring with his name on it, and his personal clothing and staff that people would have recognized. Why would, if he was trying to be involved in something that he didn't want other people to know about, and even he says later on, I don't want, lest we be shamed. Now, I don't know whether he's going to be shamed by what he did or whether he's going to be shamed by the fact that he was silly enough to give such personalized and expensive items in lieu of a kid goat. Of course, she wasn't going to be there when you got back. She ran away with a lot more valuable items than simply a kid goat. So the question would be, why did he agree to give all these personal items? What's going on here? And then later on, he finds out that she's pregnant. So what happens? They tell the story to Yehuda, and Yehuda sits in judgment, and he says, "Hotzi'u avati saref." So first of all, how can Yehuda sit in judgment? One of the first rules in law is you cannot have a judge who is partial to the case. You can't have a father-in-law sitting in a case as being the judge for his daughter-in-law, especially if she is the defendant. You need somebody who's impartial to be able to be the judge. Question number one, in that aspect. And question two is his verdict. Not only is it where would he aid him here? I always say the aid him, well, she is pregnant, but what about the fact that that she's not married? A capital punishment, that's only if it was considered adultery. But technically, she's not married. She's a widow. Right? So you'll tell me, well, she was waiting for Yibum. So first of all, there is no Yibum yet. Certainly not from a Chiyuv perspective. There's no obligation of Yibum. This is pre-Matan Torah. And if you wanted to be a nice guy, that maybe they even practice from a moral and ethical idea of that if a husband dies without children, so then it was accepted that a family member, and guess obviously it didn't necessarily have to be a brother as it is in regular Yibum, maybe any family member, even the father theoretically could have done this Yibum, maybe that, but still, a Shemeres Yavam who has relations with somebody else, it's not adultery. You violate a negative commandment. Maximum, maybe the person should get Malchus, but not Misa. Besides the fact that Sreifa is not the punishment that one would give in normal cases of adultery. So that also is somewhat of a problem that Mirza Hashem will try to deal with. And last but not least is the story of the birth of these two twins. Interesting story, and I'm sure if I was the doctor or the midwife delivering these twins, I would come back to the coffee room when I'm discussing with the other midwives what an interesting and strange delivery I just went through. But why was it necessary for the Chumash to record the events that occur? Why is that significant to us? And is there any connection between the end of the story with the birth of these twins and what happened to Yehuda in the rest of the story? Okay, so these are some of the major questions. There are obviously many more questions involved. We're not going to deal with. These are the questions. I think we have enough questions that will occupy us for the next couple of minutes. Let's see if we can try to find some answers. So first, let's go back to Rashi. Perek Lamed, again, Perek Lamed Ches. We're going to deal with Rashi, Pasuk Yud Aleph. And he says as follows. Rashi says, all right. First of all, first question Rashi is going to deal with. When Yehuda tells her to wait for the third son, was he serious or was he just playing games with her? So Rashi says in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ki Amar, Klomar docha haya ota b'kash. He basically sent her away with a flimsy excuse. Shelo haya bedaito lahasiya lo. He never had a serious intention that she should be married to his third son. Why? Ki amar pen yamus, because he said, lest my son will die. Muchzeket hizu shiamusu anasheha. This woman has a chazaka that she murders her husbands. Meaning, whether you have a chazaka after 2 or 3 times is a question, but listen, I lost 2 sons that died right after the marriage. The blame he places is on his daughter-in-law, not on his sons, chas v'shalom. Even though we'll see if you read Psukim beforehand, the blame was clearly on the part of his sons, and they died on their own actions, not necessarily because of her. But Yehuda is blaming his daughter-in-law, or at least is concerned maybe his daughter-in-law is to blame, and he's not going to take a chance with the third son. That's what Rashi says. Okay, that might be true. But then, of course, we have a number of problems in this Rashi. Number one is, why does Yehuda do that? I remember during my dating days, which were, long period of time, a long time ago, but I remember them not so dearly, but I remember them. When you went out with a girl and you realized on the first date that this was going to be the first and only time that you'll probably be one-on-one with this girl, at the end of the evening, how do you say goodnight? You say, good night, it was nice meeting you, and then walk away. Or do you say, good night, you know what, and say, you know what, I'll call you. The worst thing that you could do is to tell the girl, I'm going to call you, when you have absolutely no intention of picking up the phone and asking for a second date. You're just leading her on for no reason. Okay, so first of all, if Rashi is correct that he really was never seriously intending to give Sheila to Tamar, why didn't he simply just tell her the truth? I mean, he's got a good case. Look, I love you. You were a good girl. I lost two of my sons. I'm just not willing to take a chance and have you married a third son. I'm sorry. I wish you, good luck, and I hope you find some really, really nice. And that's it. So question number one, according to Rashi, why doesn't Yehuda do that? And even worse, Rashi's pshat is difficult, because if that is in fact Yehuda's intention, then what in the world did Yehuda expect to happen? She's going to sit by the phone. A month will go by, like half a year will go by, a year will go by, I don't know, 2 years, whatever is considered the time for the Sheila to grow up, and the phone's not ringing. And the phone is never going to ring. So what does Yehuda expect her to do? At a certain point in time, Yehuda expects her to realize that he wasn't serious, that the phone is not going to ring. I want you to get on with your life. Go on. I wish you well, but it's not going to be with my son. And if that's true, and that's what Yehuda expected, then how come later on in the story, when he's told that, your daughter-in-law is pregnant, and unless it's with your son Sheila, she committed, she basically has been, dishonorable to the family. Then instead of being angry with her and saying, Hotziu av tisareif, well, Yehuda would have said, Baruch Hashem, I'm really happy for her. She did exactly what I wanted her to do. She realized that I wasn't intending for her to marry Sheila. She went on with her life, Baruch Hashem. Why wasn't that his response, according to Rashi? Okay. Then, what is her response? Again, look, this is Rashi, few psukim later on, Rashi in Pasuk Yud Dalet. Rashi says, and this is explaining her plan. The tisalav kisasa paneh shelo yakir ba. She covered up her face so that he should not recognize her. Rashi is going to be very literal here. Vatesha b'pesach hanayim b'psichat ha'inayim b'parshat derachim shal derech timnasa. Okay, ki rasa ki gadal Sheila, because she saw that Sheila had grown up. Lefikach hifkira atzma etzel Yehuda. Therefore, she made herself hefker in regards to Yehuda. Shahaisa misava lahamid mimeno banim, because she very much wanted to have children from Yehuda. Meaning, according to Rashi, you have to take the story literally. She did get dressed up as a zono, and what do you mean? Covered up her face. There are a number of Forshim interesting who explain that in ancient times, prostitutes would cover up their faces, because it's not like you have today. Not that I'm an expert to know, but in New York City, you have people from Midwest that are walking the streets of New York. No one knows who in the world they are, so then they're not worried about anybody identifying them. But if you're talking about a small town and a local girl who's looking to make a little extra money, she's very concerned. She doesn't want everybody to know who she is and what she's doing. So she covered up her face. That was the midrag hamakam. And therefore, that's why he thought this was a woman who didn't want anybody to know exactly who she was, but she was open for business. And that's, according to Rashi, that's exactly what she did. Again, Rashi's giving me simple pshat, and it's telling her that she was willing to. Why did she do it? But not because she wanted to be a zona, but she did it for holy purposes, and that was her reasons. But still, is that her plan? Does she really assume that if she looks like a prostitute, the Yehuda is going to actually come over and proposition her? Is that the type of image that Yehuda, this dirty old man image, is that the image that he conveyed when she was in his house for Shabbos, Friday night meal? Okay, maybe. Difficult for me to buy that. The Sforno has a different explanation, which I think makes a lot more sense. Well, even though we'll see that there's a problem with his pshat as well. What does the Sforno say? Kirasa kigada shela v'chashva, and she thought, kasher Yerena Yehuda bezulat b'gdei al menuta. When Yehuda would see her, not in her clothes of widowhood, v'yishal, and he'll ask her, madua kachasata, what are you doing? Why are you home mourning for my son? Tishiveyu, she would respond to him, ki ba mawed lahasiram. The time has come to remove my clothes of widowhood. Amar la shvi almana ad yigdal shela, because he had said to her, wait till my son Shela grows up. V'nei az kvar Shela has already grown up. Meaning, according to the Sforno, never in a million years did she anticipate that Yehuda was going to come and proposition her. She did not get dressed up as a zona. That's not what happened. What did she do? She took off her black clothes of mourning. She put on a bright red, dress, put on a little bit of makeup, and she expected, Yehuda to come and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing out in the streets? What are you doing all prettied up? Why aren't you home mourning for my children?" And she would protest. This was a protest. What are you? Were you sincere? Were you just, pulling my leg? Are you serious about giving my son? Yes or no? I need an answer now. What your intention is, because the time has come. The phone hasn't rung. What's going on? So from the Sforno's perspective, the plan of Tamar makes much more sense. The only problem with his pshat, and maybe why Rashi didn't want to accept that, is that would only work if Yehuda was recognizing who this woman was in the street. If he doesn't know that it's Tamar, then the protest isn't going to work. So then how come, according to the Sforno, does Yehuda stare her straight in the face and he's negotiating with her and he has absolutely no idea who this girl is? So there's a problem in Rashi's pshat, Fidati, a problem with Sforno's pshat. So what's the reality? And what's going on here? So I'm going to quote you a Medrash now, Medrash Rabbah. It's not my words, it's the Medrash Rabbah words, which I think, first of all, you're not going to like it. You're not going to like it, but I think it's 100% the truth, and it explains away most of the problems that we have in this story. Medrash Rabbah says as follows: Amar Rav Yochanan, Bikesh Labor. When Yehuda sees this girl in the streets, he's no less from than a guy getting on a bus going to Harnof. Okay, he's not going to sit down next to her on the bus. He's not even going to look in her direction. He wanted to go the opposite direction. What happened? V'zimin le'akadosh baruch hu malach shehu memuna al hatayva. God sent an angel whose job was to be in charge of ta'ava, of lust. There's a whole different ways of explaining that. Is this physical lust, is this taiva, that what God wants to happen, and this malach makes sure that they happen. Simple pshat, your job is to create taiva within an individual. Amar lo. So the malach says to Yehuda, where are you going? Where are kings going to come from? Where are redeemers going to come from? You can't walk away from this woman. Vayet eleha el haderech. He turned to her from the road. Ba'al karcho, against his will. Shalo b'tovaso, not with his best thinking, not with his best interest in mind. Meaning, why is it, says the Medrash, how in the world can I explain behavior of Yehuda? How could such a tzaddik do such a questionable act? And that was the biggest question we had in the story. And there's a simple teretz. Teretz, it certainly works in the United States court system. he had a temporary mental illness. He was temporarily out of control. Beforehand, he was in control of his faculties. After the event, he was in control of his faculties. But for the 15 minutes in which he was involved with this woman, his body was taken over by a malach. Let's call it a dibik or malach. And it was the malach that forced him. He was mentally incompetent, temporarily mentally insane for the 15 minutes that this event happened. That is the defense that the Medrash Rabbah gives to Yehuda. So if you think about it, okay, it will answer up again almost all our questions. Explains why he did what he did. He didn't do what he did. He was turned off. The malach, basically, his body was there, but his mind was turned off. It was the malach that was controlling Yehuda. He was controlled from the outside. How do you explain Tamar going along with it? Certainly, according to the Sforno, where that wasn't her original plan, because she sees that he's out of it. She sees that he's looking at her and he doesn't recognize her. She sees that he's willing to give up some personal items that no one in their right mind would be willing to give up. I mean, you're right, because he wasn't in his right mind. And that's why he would be willing to give them up as a security. And once she sees that, so she sees she's going to go along. This is something beyond, the normal. She's going to go along with. This is beyond Hashem. And basically, this answers up pretty much all the questions. Why he gives up, the personal items. Why, and it answers up all our questions for them, all our major questions. Except, and this is the reason why you probably don't like the Medrash, that it raises bigger question. And we had a problem. Well, it's one thing where the Medrash may not, or the Chazal may not give a critique of Yehuda, but to give me this answer, why can't you use this answer anytime we do an Avera? We have a very basic belief in Judaism, and we've discussed this before, that the world was created where human being has Bechira Chavshis. We're not predetermined. God doesn't program us and tell us how we should act. We are in control of our actions. That's a very basic belief in Judaism. And what you're basically telling me now is that Yehuda didn't have Bechira Chavshis here, but rather God forced him to do what he wanted to do. How do you explain that? That goes against basic Judaism 001. Let's hold on with that question. We will deal with it as we go on. Let's skip a little bit down. Again, another side question, of course, which we're not going to deal. We ask a whole bunch of questions regarding the court case. How can Yehuda be a judge? We're not going to deal with most of those questions. Nor am I going to even deal why Dafka Sreifa. Why was that the mode of capital punishment, where that's normally not the punishment given in adultery? I just want to quote you one interesting pshat that you might find, just something interesting to quote at the Shabbos table, perhaps. And this is the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim says, Ben Yehuda Chasid Piresh, Lo Dana Ota Yehuda L'Sreifa. Yehuda didn't say that she should burn at the stake. What do you mean? It seems clearly from the text that he did. Ella Sheyisrfu La Roshem Bein Paneha. But he wanted to brand a scarlet letter on her forehead, Siman Shehu Zonah, as a sign to the rest of the community that she had done an immoral act. The kasher yada Yehuda shehi mimenu lo hesa zonah lo asu la shum davar. Meaning, according to the Baal HaTurim, it didn't say take her out and burn her at the stake. Take her out and brand her. Not chas v'sham to kill her. She didn't do anything that weren't capital punishment. We already discussed that. She wasn't really married technically. But from the time of the flood, the nations of the world were makbid on sniut. We were makbid on a certain moral level of actions between male and females. And for her to do something this publicly, that would cause a tremendous yeridah in the moral actions of the community if they would not respond in such hard way. And therefore, let's make an example of her, hotziu of the saref, brand her with a scarlet letter. Okay, cute. Anyway, shot or not shot, let's go on to the rest, figure out the rest of the story. We fast forward, she's pregnant. They find out that she's pregnant. Okay, what happens? Perk, Lamed Ches, Rashi, Pasuk, Chaf Hey. So Rashi says there, he mutzeis, she was being brought out to be burnt. V'hishalchal chamia. Famous Rashi. She sends the simanim to her father-in-law. Lo ratzta lahal bin panav. She didn't want to embarrass him. V'lomar, and to say publicly, mimcha ani muberet. You're going to accuse me of immoral activity? Who do you think my partner was? She doesn't do that publicly. What does she say? El leish asher eila lo. She sends him the simanim in a brown paper bag. Right? Says, now it's up to you. You have the evidence, not me. Amra, she said, Im yoda miatzma yoda. If he'll admit on his own and take the responsibility to do the right thing, okay, let him do it. V'im lav, and if not, yisrafuni, let them burn me. V'al al ben panav, but I will not embarrass him publicly. Mikad amru, from this incident, Chazal say, noachlo liyadam, shapel atzim l'kivshan ace. It's preferable for a person to allow himself to be thrown into a fiery furnace, rather than embarrass his friend in public. Beautiful. What sensitivity of this girl must have had. You know, if I didn't really think about it, I would actually start crying for her at this point in time. But in reality, she didn't show any sensitivity here at all. If she were really sensitive, after the first month, when she, woke up in the morning, was nauseous, went to her local drugstore and got herself a pregnancy test, and it came home and showed that she was pregnant. Then why didn't she simply, at the end of that first month, when she knew, the rest of the world didn't know yet, she wasn't yet showing, why don't she get the phone and says, Yehuda, you and I have to meet for lunch. Yehuda says, well, I'm busy, I'm, shearing sheep, Well, I don't know, you happen to be missing some things, you're missing a coat, you're a little bit cold. What about your walking stick? I mean, what about your ring? She says, well, yeah, I am. How do you know about that? Well, I happen to have them here. Maybe you and I should meet. I'll be right over. Let's do Cafe Atara. I'll meet you at 12. That's what should have happened. That's sensitivity. And they should have met. She should discuss the problem. She should say, you know what? I'm willing to go to Switzerland. And just pay for my expenses. I'll have the baby there. I'll put up the baby for adoption, whatever. No one has to know. That's sensitivity. Is this sensitivity? You wait till the whole world sees that you're showing, and it's public knowledge, and he's just claimed that you deserve to be burnt at the stake, and the whole town is dragging you out to burn you at the stakes. Now, and only now, you confront him with the evidence. That's being sensitive. So the Medrash, I think, was bothered by that as well. Another difficult Medrash. As the Medrash says, he mutzeit, says the Medrash Rabbah. Amar Rav Yudin, mikan shene'abdu. What does it mean, mutzeit? Remember, everybody learned the parak, elu mitzias. The word mitzia means like a lost object. From the word, when it uses the expression he mutzeit, that implies that the simanim, she lost them. Why didn't she confront him after the end of the first month? One very simple reason. She lost the simanim, according to the Medrash. She couldn't. She didn't have any proof. How did she get it? Now, when she was being let out, so a miracle happened and God somehow replaced them. Hikmah Damad. Oh, right. Anyway, this is what the Medrash says. Are you kidding me? That she lost them, and it may not be literally that she lost them, but it could be. But the very fact, why didn't she confront him earlier? For one very simple reason, according to the Medrash. The Medrash is consistent with his Pshat. She realized when the event was happening that he was not himself, that he was turned off. For whatever reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want him to know what was happening. They did not want him to know that he's having relations with his daughter-in-law. Well, if God didn't want to reveal that to him, she wasn't going to reveal that to him. And that's why she kept quiet for the 3 months. But now, when she's about to die, So if not now, when? Now and only now does she confront him with the evidence. And that's what happens, right? That's what happens. Now is the response. What's going to be? So what's going on here? I think what's going on here, and right, is the following. If we look at what has happened to Yehuda up till now, Yehuda's made a series of mistakes. And we have to remember, by the way, Yehuda in Jewish history, what was the goal of Yehuda? What position was he to play in the history of Klal Yisrael? We know that Yehuda, Malchus, comes from Yehuda. Lo Yasser Shevet Yehuda. Ironically, the rod, the staff, will not be removed from Yehuda, even though Yehuda here was very willing to give up his staff. That's where he was supposed to go become. And what is a prime category for a leader? Maybe not today's world, but in theory at least. If you look back to the first Melech in Jewish history, Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech was not from Shevet Yehuda. The Jews asked for a king. There wasn't yet anybody in Yehuda worthy to be a king. The most worthy person for the position was a man by the name of Shaul, the biggest tzaddik amongst Klal Yisrael. And as we know, he might have been the biggest tzaddik as a private citizen, but he did not do a great job as a king. Why? What was his major flaw? Why his rulership could not continue? But he kept looking at public opinion polls. He didn't do what he knew the Navi Shmuel or what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to do. He did what the people wanted him to do. He wanted the people to think that he listened to them, that he appreciated their opinion, and he wanted to be popular. And the biggest mistake he did is when the people, when they went to attack Amalek, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, I want everything wiped out, everything, men, women, and children. And the people said, the cattle we can take back and bring korbanos. I mean, there's so many things here that we can ban. We're not going to kill everybody. He said, okay, it seems kind of cruel. He felt the people were having a difficult time killing everybody, and he acquiesced to what they wanted. And Shmuel says to him, you're a melech. You can't listen to what the people want. You have to do what's right. That is a priority to be a leader. Well, let's look at the actions of Yehuda. Did he possess that quality? Yehuda, when Yosef came to Shechem, and the brothers wanted to kill him, Yehuda knew darn well that killing was not the right thing to do. What was the right thing to do, and he knew how Yaakov Avinu would be affected if Yosef wasn't brought back safe and sound to home. But he wasn't willing to come up and say, no, I'm not going to allow that. We are bringing him back. We're not murderers. We're not doing that. We'll just have to live with the brat. He didn't say that. He says, oh, let's compromise. Let's sell him. He did not do what a leader should do. He was concerned about public opinion. He wanted the other 9 brothers there to be able to accept him. He wasn't going to argue with them. When they come home and they see that their decision was not the best decision, and they see that their father is not getting over the death of Yosef, they blame Yehuda. Does Yehuda come and say, yell at them and say, listen, this was a democracy. It wasn't a dictatorship here. This was a democracy. We all voted on it. You guys were just as responsible as I am. Don't blame me. We are equally available. Stick up for your rights. He doesn't. He wants everybody to like him. He doesn't like being criticized. So instead of taking the heat, he leaves. He leaves the family. He gets involved with an Adulamite business partner. He marries a Bat Kanaani, right? If I take it literally, something that the rest of us were makbid not to marry a Kanaani, he marries a Kanaani. He has 3 children he never should have had. And even when 2 of his children die, and he's within his rights to be able to tell Tamar, go home, I love you, but we're not, we're just not going to continue. He wants to be liked. He can't say something negative. He's, even according to Rashi's Parshat, he pushes her off with straw. She'll get the message, but he can't openly tell her something that she might feel upset about. He's concerned about his public opinion. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? What am I supposed to do? Allow Yehuda to walk off the face of Jewish history, which is basically what he's been doing? He says no. God doesn't take away his Bechira Chavshis. God is creating the greatest Bechira Chavshis decision of Yehuda's life. In your past, Yehuda, you've been so concerned with public opinion. Well, that's true. Well, now let's see how you handle this scenario. You've just told the entire town that this woman did a despicable act, ad kedei kach, that she deserves to be publicly executed. And now you're holding the evidence in your hand that the person that she did this despicable act with is none other than you yourself. Now what are you going to do? Are you going to follow your previous behavior and just be concerned about public opinion? You can take those simanim, throw them in the fire with her. No one will ever know the difference. They'll come to the shiva. They'll come to wish you, oh, how can this woman have done such a terrible thing to you? That you're the biggest tzaddik in the world. You don't deserve a daughter-in-law like that. And you can go on living as if nothing happened. It can happen. But if you do that, you'll have to live with the fact that an innocent woman and child, or in this case, children, were put to the stake and murdered because you weren't man enough to do what you know in your heart is right. At this time, the stakes were too difficult. Yehuda finally admits to what's going on. In fact, this is Rashi says it clearly in Pasuk Chavav. Rashi says, Sadka bidvarav, mimeni himu beret. Simple pshat is, she's right. He admits she's pregnant from me. But here, Rashi quotes Medrash. Razal Darshu, Shiyatz Baskal V'Yamra. Baskal came up and said these words. Mimeni umiiti yatsu hadvarim. What does it mean? Sadka mimeni. He may have said sadka, but God said mimeni. Everything that happened, I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, orchestrated it. I sent the Malach HaTaiva. I was the one who made sure that he didn't recognize her and went through with it. Lefisha haisat snua beveis chamia. She was a snua in her father-in-law's house. Gezarti sheyetzi mimeni malachim. So I wanted kings to come dafka from Tamar. Mishev Yehuda gezarti lahamod malachim b'Yisrael. And it's from Shev Yehuda that malachim are going to come. Yes, there's bechira chashis. It doesn't mean that we decide everything in life. What your IQ is, which family you're born into, what country you live into, what talents you may have, those, everyone has a different test in life. That was pre-decided by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What you do with those talents, that is up to you. Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miyira shamayim. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has actually set up an unbelievable chashis decision. It's your decision, Yehuda. What are you going to do about it? And this time, instead of running away, Yehuda meets up to his challenge, and he is in the process of tshuva, of coming back into the fold and becoming the ultimate leader that he will become. Where do we see this? This story with his children. What happens with his two children? Two twins. So the first son is already out. Half of him is out. A midwife puts a ribbon on his hand. But the second son that's still in the womb says, wait a second. I'm Peretz. I'm the guy that David HaMelech is supposed to come from. Malch is supposed to come from me, right? I have to be the first one out. But what am I going to do now? I mean, all these midwives, all these people already know that this kid is halfway out. If I pull the kid back in and come out first, they'll think I'm a meshuggah. You know what? Says Peretz, I'm not concerned about public opinion. I don't care what people are going to think because Malchus is coming from me. I have to do what's right, regardless of public opinion. This quality of leadership, the Yehuda has been running away from all his life. Not only does he personally change with this one action that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up, but rather is passed on in his spiritual genetic DNA to his children, to Peretz, and subsequently to Malchus Beis David. So here, the lesson I think from this week's story, I think is an important lesson. The idea is that Kadosh Baruch that there is Bechira Chavshis, that Kadosh Baruch Hu, even when we go after derech, we make a series of mistakes, and we seem to be so far away from where we should be, and what the expectations were given the talents that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never gives up on us. And even though we have difficult scenarios along the way, these scenarios were set up by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to allow us to learn the lessons that we need to get back to where we should have been in the first place. Now, this is true not only in regard to individuals, I think it's even true on a broader level as well. There were two simple questions that we never brought up within this whole story, and seem to be small questions compared to the questions that we really did raise. In the beginning, these are psukim that we didn't even raise. Perek Lamed Ches, and again, I'll do this very quickly. The first two psukim, when it talks about the fact that Yehuda leaving home, it says, Perek Lamed Ches pasuk Aleph, Vayi beis Ahi vayered Yehuda meis Echav. Yehuda left his brothers. Vayet el ish ha'adulami shmo Chira. He set up a partnership with a Adulamite man by the name of Chira. This was the person later on who was his friend that was with him with the whole Yehuda and Tamar story. Also, Vayar Sham Yehuda bat ish Knaani. He also sees there a daughter of a Canaanite man, Ushmo Shua, and his name was Shua. He took her, he married her, and he had relations with her. That was his wife. Now, throughout the story, right, we don't know the name of this woman. She is described only as Bat Shua, the daughter of Shua. Why don't we know her name? Why do we have to know the name of her father? If she wasn't significant enough that the Torah felt compelled to tell us her first name, certainly her father, who has nothing to do with Yehuda, Kimat, why in the world do you tell us his name? Ironically, this is the exact opposite of Yehuda's second wife, Tamar. By Tamar, we do know her first name, but they don't tell us anything about her genealogy, who her father, grandfather was, even though she had a lot of yichus. She came from Shem. Why not? And why does the Torah mention the name of a business partner of Yehuda? Great, he got, why? Okay, why is that significant? Tell me the name of his account. Do I know who his account was? Do I know who his lawyer was? Do I know who the name of his barber? Why do I have to need to know these? That it doesn't seem to be relevant to the story. So it's interesting just that later on, Chazal identify Chira as being, the Medrash Rabbah talks about as being Chira Melech Tzur. I'll quote you the Medrash Rabbah. Ki oev haya chirim leDavid kol hayamim. Pasuk in Malachim Aleph, Parakei Pasuk Tesvav says that Chirim was beloved to David kol hayamim. What do you mean kol hayamim? Limud haya haish hazeh liot oev l'shevet zeh. This man had a history of having a close relationship with Shevet Yehuda. Ulefi zeh chaya karv le'elef matayim shana. And because of him having this close relationship and loyalty to Yehuda, Chira, who was Chiram, Melech, same person, he lived for 1,200 years. Now, am I supposed to take this literally? I don't know whether it is the same person, whether it was a great-great-great-grandfather, Chira and Chiram. But the first thing it's telling us that this Chira is mentioned in the Torah because a descendant of his, or him himself, 1,200 years later, was the person that helped build palaces, for David and Shlomo, and helped build the Beit HaMikdash. He was a partner of the Jewish people in building the Beit HaMikdash. And Bat Shua, why do we only know the name Bat Shua? Well, first of all, the word Bat Shua sounds like Bat Sheva, the woman who ultimately will give birth to Mashiach. And in fact, even more than just sounding like it, in Divrei Hayamim, if you want to look at Divrei Hayamim Aleph, Perek Gimel, Halacha, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Hey, talks about the children that David HaMelech had in Yerushalayim. And he says, Ve'ela nodu lo b'Yerushalayim, Shima v'Shova v'Nasan v'Shlomo, right? Arba lebat Shua, bat Amiel. It doesn't call her bat Sheva. It uses the expression, same expression we have in this parsha, bat Shua, meaning that the tikkun that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does with the story of Yehuda Tamar is not just a personal tikkun, but it's an event that's going to be a tikkun for the entire Klal Yisrael. As the Medrash Rabbah says, Shvatim hayu asukim b'mechiraso shel Yosef. During this parsha, the Shvatim were involved with selling Yosef. The Yosef asuk b'saku b'taniso, and Yosef put on his sackcloth and was fasting. And what happened to him? Yehuda asuk likach lo isha, and Yehuda was concerned about getting married and leaving the house. When all these terrible things supposedly happen, and when Yehuda marries the person who's out of the faith, and these people were selling Yosef, doing all these terrible things, and it seems that Bnei Yaakov were going off the derech, nowhere near from what they were supposed, the trajectory that they were supposed to follow. What was HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing? He says they're not going off the derech. This is all part of the plan to bring them closer to Mashiach. And in fact, when we celebrate this week, just want to put one more interesting something to think about the connection to Hanukkah. If you look at the three things that Yehuda gives her as a security, one is the chotemet. Where does that word come from? Hanukkah, the crucible of all had the chotemet of the Kohen Gadol on it. Right? The psilecha, your coat, sounds like psilim, the wicks in the menorah, and the mata, which represents Malchus, restore Malchus during the Hanukkah story. Yehuda Maccabi and brothers take over the rulership. So what this story is telling us is not only a story of personal salvation, but it's trying to tell us something in regard to the whole Jewish nation. We have a mission in life. Sometimes in life we fall off the derech and we don't live up to the expectations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God, the same way God did not give up on Yehuda on a personal level, and he set up scenarios in life that he should learn from his mistakes, and ultimately, even though they were difficult and painful decisions, right, and experiences, ultimately led him to come back to the Jewish people, to regain his position as being ultimately the Melech, Malchus Beis David, and ultimately Melech Mashiach. So too HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the same thing with Jewish people. Whether it was with the Hanukkah story, whether it's other, unfortunately, painful scenarios that we've gone through in Jewish history, right? It's not just that, where in the world was HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The question I always ask is, where are we? When we're doing what we're supposed to do, we're not going to solve these problems. We're not going to have these problems. When we don't do what we're supposed to do, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't give up on us, not like the other nations of the world have said that there's a new Israel. You rejected God. God has rejected you. God will never reject us. God might punish us. God might send difficult lessons to practice on the derech, but ultimately we will learn our lessons. We will come back to the derech, and we will reach our goal of bringing Mashiach b'mehera b'meinu to Klal Yisrael, and the whole world will come to recognize the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Halavai that we should be successful in doing this. We should come to learn the same lessons that Yehuda learned on a personal level. We should learn on a national level, and that the end of Jewish suffering should end b'mehera b'meinu. Chanukah Sameach L'Kulam.